right, we still have a few people filtering in, but we're going to go ahead and get started anyway. If you're just coming in, please go ahead and say hello in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're from, maybe why you're here. And if you could, change your name to be something like your name at your ecosystem. You can look at my name or Veronica's or some other folks to see kind of the format that we're talking about. If you're new to this concept and you don't know what an ecosystem is or what yours is, you can put your city and state. You know, this is probably the strangest time that any of us have lived through. If it's not, we need to go get a coffee when we can, because I really want to hear your story. It's a time of confusion. It's a time of anxiety. It's a time of upheaval. But with all those things comes something else, a time of opportunity. People are working and learning and thinking in new ways. While new barriers have been created, once immovable barriers have also been lifted. And we have an opportunity to move into this next decade with a communal focus. We have the opportunity to move idea into action and to solve problems that were once thought to be unsolvable. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jeremy Shore, and if you don't know me, in addition to the work I do supporting schools and communities, I'm lucky enough to have the opportunity to facilitate and moderate sessions for this community. If we don't already know each other, please tweet at me at Jeremy Shore or say hello in the chat. And while you're at it, again, last time I'm going to mention it, if you haven't already, please go ahead and change your Zoom display name to be your name at your ecosystem or your city and state if you don't know your ecosystem. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to our active ecosystem members. You're the core of everything we do. And welcome to all of the new faces I see. People who are living within one of the STEM learning ecosystems, but perhaps aren't as active. People who are living within one of the STEM learning ecosystems and perhaps have never even heard of it. I really hope that your involvement today isn't a one-time thing, and instead that we can count on you to answer the call and help move STEM in your region and across the country forward. That we can count on you to come together to find ways to combine efforts to provide new and greater opportunities for the young people in your region and across the country. Many of you on today's call are members of this community, but some are not. So what is it? The STEM learning ecosystems, now consisting of 94 communities around the world, bring together business and industry, pre-K through 12 and higher education, out-of-school organizations, nonprofits, philanthropy, and more to all work together for that better that we just mentioned. More equitable, actionable STEM for all. Today's gathering of the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice, organized by TIES, is bringing together leaders who are committed to STEM and making lives and communities better. This is a first for TIES and a first for the Community of Practice, the broad initiative that TIES mentions. Today, we begin the process of identifying the ideas for how to make STEM better, more accessible for all, more responsive to our needs, more visible in our communities, and most importantly, more equitable. And we're going to do more than talk. We're going to learn how to elevate our voices in tangible, concrete ways. Today's call is a critical one for STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice because we have a new administration coming in that's expressed a willingness to listen and learn and act. Equity in STEM is a critical priority for the new administration, and STEM has never been more important than it is now for our country amid the pandemic with a global health crisis. We need STEM to ensure a world and planet that thrives. As leaders of regional STEM learning ecosystems, we believe that your voice is now going to be heard. Today's town hall session is intended to produce critical feedback that we can use to create a report for the new administration and to draft policy initiatives. You'll learn more about the structure of today's town hall shortly, but first, thank you to a few special partners who've helped enable today. And I think Angie's going to throw a screenshot up there of some of the funders, the town hall funders, STEM Push, 100K 10, TD Williamson, Broadcom Foundation, Arizona Community Foundation. If you know folks in these organizations, please consider thanking them for allowing us to do this work. And while we're acknowledging our funders, I'd also like to thank Jan Morrison for conceiving of the idea of this town hall series. And now I'd like to introduce a very critical leader in the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice, Vince Stewart. Vince is Executive Director of the California STEM Network, a statewide coalition of business, government, community, and education partners committed to expanding science, technology, engineering, and math opportunities for all children in California. In this role, he also oversees the Bay Area STEM ecosystem. Vince has more than 2 decades of experience in public policy and was appointed by Governors Brown and Schwarzenegger to senior education policy positions. Prior to joining Children Now, he was Vice Chancellor for External Relations for the California Community Colleges. Vince, can you tell me, why does this call matter and what do you hope for it?
Great, thank you, Jeremy. First, let me start by saying good morning and Happy New Year, everyone. And I also want to thank Jan and the entire team at TIES for organizing these town halls. And I really appreciate being invited to speak today as a representative of STEM ecosystem leaders. I also want to thank Melissa and Eric for their participation and partnership, I think, as members of the Transitions Agency Review Team for the U.S. Department of Education. They're in a very unique and influential role to work with us as partners. And of course, thank the attendees for joining today in this conversation and for the many recommendations and suggestions they've made in preparation for today's town hall. Jeremy, to answer your question, I think, with this conversation, we have a very special opportunity to help shape and define the STEM education agenda for the Biden-Harris administration. And this is an agenda that I believe should be about STEM for all, and using STEM not only to prepare the skilled workforce that we need, but to ensure that all those we educate become critical thinkers and problem solvers, which is what STEM education does. I think we're now, with this conversation, in the very fortunate position to not only convey our priorities, but to also demonstrate that we're willing to join in partnership and contribute to this process and to move an agenda forward. So we really want, and I think need to move it to a point of taking action. And in doing so, to really leverage and amplify the commitment of the Biden-Harris administration to the key principles of equity, social justice, and creating opportunity for all of our citizens, especially those who have been historically marginalized and disenfranchised from our society and public institutions. So really today, I hope we'll give considerable thought to taking many of the aspirational goals we've previously identified as STEM ecosystem leaders and others who are on this call, and translate them into actionable and achievable outcomes for the communities we serve so that we create real and sustainable opportunities to ensure that all our students and youth have access to that high quality STEM teaching and learning as part of their core education, both formal and informal, and that STEM is no longer seen as an add-on or an extra in many cases. We know that STEM education, particularly real-world hands-on instruction, is essential to engaging students and providing them with the knowledge, skills, and abilities they'll need to succeed in life. So I think this is a definite starting point, and one that I know and really hope that we will be able to continue on with the administration and certainly through Eric and Melissa's leadership. So with that, again, thank you, and I'll turn it back to Jeremy.
Thank you, Vince. If everyone could please join me in welcoming Melissa Moritz, the Vice President of Business Development and Partnerships for the National Math and Science Initiative, NIMSI. She has also served as the Deputy Director of STEM at the U.S. Department of Education and as the Vice President of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math and Education. Forgot that last and initiatives at Teach for America. Welcome, Melissa. As somebody who's been at the Department of Ed, can you share a little bit about the importance of work like this?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, first of all, for having me and asking me to join this inaugural event. And thank you for the leadership of TIES and the STEM learning ecosystems at such a critical moment in time for us as a country and for STEM education. I love thinking about policy as ensuring the right enabling conditions are present to support the great work that you all do and will continue to do, serving students and their families with meaningful, engaging, and equitable STEM learning experiences. I began my career as a middle school science teacher in New York City at a Children's Aid Society school, which is a community school model. And I always bring that experience with me when I think about policy. But because we are all biased by our own experiences, hearing from leaders like you, a diverse group of individuals and organizations, is such an amazing opportunity to inform federal, state, and local policy opportunities. Your voices, your experiences, your perspectives matter so much when it comes to policy making. And ultimately, that's how great policy happens. Hearing from you all what the things are that you want to do more of, and figuring out the policy levers that are at our disposal and what we might be able to collectively advocate for. One of the things I love to do is to work with educators, families, students, community members, funders, and members of organizations that support the kinds of rich and dynamic STEM learning ecosystems that you all are part of, to determine what the policy opportunities might be to enable the successes and experiences you all are hoping to have. I like to think of policy work as applying the engineering design process a little bit to identify and define the problems, research that problem, outline possible approaches, and then workshop those until we find one that works. And we'll do a little bit of that today. It can be complicated to figure out what is federally controlled, what is state controlled, what are the right things, how should we think about this? And as we talk today, I encourage you not to focus on those details just yet. Focus in on what you know your students in the local communities need, what amazing things your ecosystem has done, and that you know you want to do more of. And as we enter this session today, I also wanted to make sure to underscore that we don't always have to focus in on the things that aren't working when we think about policy, although those can be the easiest to identify. We can also focus in on things that are working really well that we want to see more of, and identify the policy enablers that are leading to those great things happening that might enable other ecosystems across the country to be able to see those kinds of same things in their local community. So thank you very much for having me today. I'm excited for our conversations and really appreciate all of your leadership.
Thank you, Melissa. And I know I'm looking forward to hearing more from you in a little bit. Finally, Eric Nicholas Martin is a senior policy advisor for the Day One Project. He previously served as a policy advisor at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, worked at Unity.com as senior education program manager, and as a fellow at the U.S. Department of Education. The Day One Project seeks to offer a shared platform for people to convert big ideas into policy change. The Day One architects feel that anyone out there could hold the next big idea to shape and influence the policy priorities of the next presidential term. Emerging technologies, scientific discovery, and creative approaches to solving the toughest problems bubble up in pockets around the United States, and the Day One team helps foster the big ideas into action. Welcome, Eric, and thank you for joining us. You're a fellow at Ed, so I'm sure you know that we as educators sometimes struggle to move from the ideation phase to action. What do we need to be thinking about now to make sure that the things we discuss today can actually make a difference?
Yeah, so I'm excited to dig into that question. And thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for inviting me to brainstorm with almost 400 new friends here. And hi to my fellow Marylanders. I saw several in the chat as people were doing introductions. So as a nerd, I prepared a couple of slides to share with everyone. I won't spend too much time going through it, but I think it'll help sort of get people into a brainstorming mode and thinking about policy tools available for this discussion. So I'm going to do a little screen share here. Jeremy, is that up
yeah,
okay?
We got what it's about to pop up, so you're good.
Okay. And let me just adjust my computer here. All right, this was unscripted. I should have thought about. So Day One Project, as Jeremy said, we've sort of set ourselves up to work with as broad a set of experts, former policymakers, current policymakers, and people who are new to the policymaking world as possible, and to try and turn big ideas into actionable policy. So I'm going to start with some very light humor for your Tuesday afternoon or morning. We'll try and get through it quickly in case it falls a little flat on Zoom. Here we go. So how is the federal government just like a startup? Well, this is your mission statement. Form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, blah, blah, blah. For ourselves and for our posterity, our children and our children's children. This is your org chart, frightening as it is. 4.2 million employees. You get to appoint a tiny, tiny, tiny percent of them. Most of them can't be fired, though some will make more exuberant attempts than others. This is your board of directors, 435 House members, 100 senators. They represent a population of upwards of 300 million. Those are your shareholders. About half of them want to fire you most of the time. And this is your spending budget, which you have very little creative control over. And year to year is a bit of a roulette wheel in terms of seeing what is and isn't fully appropriated the way that you would like to see it be. These are your KPIs, numbers that you really only have an illusory sense of control over. This is your general counsel, who versus being in a startup where the question might be, do whatever you want as long as it's not explicitly illegal. The government, do anything you want unless if it's explicitly legal. And this is your headquarters, of course. And this is the Executive Office of the President, which is larger and more expansive and more bureaucratic than many may realize. There's a lot of councils and a lot of advisory commissions, all doing a lot of hard work to coordinate and think about what future budgets should be, regulatory agendas should be, et cetera. Office of Science and Technology Policy, where I worked, is a small little division dedicated to science and tech issues, including STEM education. So that's a quick overview to situate people. Just going to spend a few minutes on tools. I'll start with the point that I'll finish with, which is in every case, trying to get to specific and actionable as possible with a policy idea is the most important thing. It is very easy to come up with criticisms of a system. And when you're in a policymaking position, you will hear a lot of extremely valid criticism about all kinds of systems. But what you're looking for is a specific and actionable idea, which gives you a sense of what is possible, what is the sequence of events that need to take place in order to make that thing possible, and who should have the authority or has the authority or should be given the authority to make that sequence of events take place. And if there's one takeaway in terms of thinking through policy ideas, it's trying to be specific and trying to keep actionable in mind. If your idea isn't actionable, that can be okay as long as it is forcing the status quo of the system to ask, well, why isn't that an actionable idea, and is it possible for it to become an actionable idea? Expanding the realm of the possible. So you've got the president's budget. President proposes a budget to Congress. That's a policy tool every year. You've got working with Congress to craft legislation to authorize or expand or change federal authorities. You've got executive action, where you just have a new administration act with its own legal authorities where it can. President's ability to convene, which we used heavily during the Obama term, to bring people together, private sector, public sector, in between, make commitments, generate new sources of funding, establish shared goals, and empowering those people to try and push ideas forward, because any policy initiative is really only as good as the doer, the person who is tasked with carrying it through. So you can think about policy in a more abstract, maybe useful way is movement in a direction for a reason. Instead of sort of just jargony terms, policy is about movement towards a goal. So this is my former boss at OSTP, who had this quote, which I think is helpful to remind people, we're all captives of our own experience. We develop sort of these implicit or explicit senses of what is possible. But ultimately, policy is the result of human action, and it can be changed through human action. So I'm not going to go through all of these. I have a document, which I'll share in the chat as soon as I pull down my slide sheet. But there's obviously a lot of specific tools that you can leverage across the federal government. You have several kinds of executive actions, executive orders, presidential memos, policy directives for national security related issues, OMB guidance, which clarifies what federal agencies can or should do with their budgets or with their regulations or shouldn't do, rulemaking, standards. You have treaties with foreign entities, which can incite movement in a direction for a reason. You can restructure organizations to emphasize new priorities or to make sure certain things are prioritized. And you can always try and think about creative ways if your particular policy idea isn't salient enough to be a high priority. Are there existing policy vehicles, bills that are getting passed, or initiatives that are launched where you can sort of hitch on and be part of that movement? And of course, reversals, undoing what was done before. So there's a lot of these. Is the private sector to sort of chase after goals. You can do things like many federal agencies, including Department of Ed, have prize authority, which means they can state a goal or a set of objectives that they want the private sector or even sort of hybrid sector to go out and compete to achieve something. So at Department of Ed, we launched at the very end of the Obama term, a EdSim challenge, which was about getting sort of high quality educational simulations for things like medical training, career development training, and to see what kind of high quality ones could rise to the top without us going out and explicitly having a contract tell someone to go and build a specific tool. We instead put out the parameters, the vision, and had a board of outside experts to evaluate and had the best solutions and new technologies rise to the top. So there's lots of creative tools available to federal government, especially even in cases where you don't even know what the exact right answer is. Again, calls for movement, coalition building, 100K in 10 is a great example of that one. And convening and spotlighting and saying, this is what's working, this isn't what's working. Federal government wants more people to do what is working, etc. Oh, is my camera off also?
Eric, yeah, your bandwidth is a little bit shaky and you were cutting in and out, so I turned your camera off.
I see. Thank you for that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. There's lots of good conversation happening in the chat. Eric, Melissa, I encourage you to take a peek. Several folks have asked whether the slides will be available. Yes, they will be. Along with the recording, you'll get communication from Alyssa or Veronica that has all of that information. So there's some really good content there. And I think the critical component here is for us to really realize, I think, and Eric, tell me, or Melissa, if I'm wrong, to realize this machine is a whole lot bigger. I think we imagine it as a massive machine, and that doesn't scratch the surface. It's a lot bigger than it is. So what we have to do if we want change to happen is get content that is concise, to the point, actionable, and based in solutions that have worked. These documents that I know I like to write that are, here are all my problems, don't actually do anything. What we need is, look, here's a problem. I found a solution. We could scale it. And those types of documents I think are really powerful. So along those lines, what we'd like to do next is spend the next couple of minutes with you, everyone who's on this call, ranking one of 3 issues that you as a community have already identified as top priorities for the new administration. We'll take the one that receives the most votes and spend a little time workshopping it for action with Eric, Melissa, and Vince. Afterwards, we're going to move for a few minutes to breakout rooms to capture some of your best thinking about how to influence change and action for STEM. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll right now. And each of you should, in theory, be seeing just a single question with 3 possible answers. So go ahead and vote on those answers if you could. While everyone's voting, Vince, I'm wondering if you could kind of share with us what your answer is for this question.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeremy. So for me, I would say, the answer, I would select question 1. How can the Biden-Harris administration improve equity and access to STEM education and stronger career pipelines in our communities? I think for us in California, and I think it's representative of the rest of the country, really investing in early STEM instruction. We know that the disparities in terms of STEM achievement appear very early on, 4th and 8th grade oftentimes, and they're most disproportionate by race and ethnicity. So how do we make those investments early on? Teacher professional development, teacher training, instructional materials, innovative instruction to really ensure that all students have the abilities and the skills to pursue STEM if that's what they want to do later in life. How do we then use sort of that priority to leverage all of the resources within our communities? In the Bay Area, we're very fortunate. We have a number of science centers. How can they be brought into the picture to help support schools to deliver that type of instruction, both directly to students and professional development? So for us, we're really looking at what can the federal government do to help us in making that early investment. And oftentimes it's the bully pulpit. It is a president and a vice president using their voice and their influence to state something as a priority. And then it is removing barriers. And then thirdly, it's oftentimes, providing additional resources and creating something as a priority that is part of a core. So how do we address STEM in much the same way we address the supports for English learners or students with disabilities?
Thank you, Vince.
For me, that's how I would answer that question.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'm going to share the results right now. Before I share them, I want you folks to know there's not a whole lot of votes for early childhood. And I feel you, early childhood people. That's where I always vote. But I want to be clear that we're talking just about which one we're going to workshop now. These are all priorities. So if your vote didn't get selected, that doesn't mean it's not going to be part of this report and of this work. But the winner pretty strongly was the first option. How can the Biden-Harris administration improve equity and access to STEM education and stronger STEM career pipelines in your communities? So with that as our target, Melissa, how should we be thinking about moving this work forward?
Yeah, good question. So I actually have a question for Vince and Eric both. I mean, so equity and access is huge, right? Have you thought about the specific, like to Eric, to your point, let's workshop a little bit about what this would look like to turn it into specific and actionable. So Vince, I might start with you with a question of, can you give me an example where you are seeing strong equity and access play out, whether that's at the program level or something that you have done in your ecosystem where you would say is an example of what we want to see more of, or on the flip side, something that's preventing students from participating that we would want to think about removing a barrier?
Sure. So let me start with a positive. So what we're seeing more of in terms of equity and access and in starting early is working with our public institutions of higher education in terms of how do they recruit a more diverse teacher workforce, because we know research indicates that students of color in particular benefit and do better when they have teachers that are reflective of their own racial and ethnic identity. So how do we diversify that profession? How do we build in more early math and science instruction within their preparation? So many of those teachers, particularly elementary school teachers, have greater comfort and knowledge and abilities within STEM, particularly math and science, that they feel that they are effective with those subjects. So we're seeing a great commitment within our colleges and universities to do that, but we need to do more, and a lot of that just takes the resources, and it takes faculty sort of embracing that change.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for providing that that context. So as you were talking, in my head, I was sort of saying, oh, okay, so if we're focused in on increasing teacher diversity as a key strategy here, some of the pieces that could be utilized, we could shine a light on some of the programs that you just mentioned that are doing great work. We could shine a light on grow your own programs. We could think about existing funding mechanisms that work to both increase teacher diversity, focus in on recruitment, retention, as well as teacher preparation. So those might be Title I and Title II in terms of federal Department of Ed dollars. And then Eric, I'm curious from your, what other specific ideas might you have, or follow-up questions for Vince about how we would go from big idea?
So first I'll cheat a little bit and share one day one proposal that may be of interest for the community. This was a proposal written by Monique Chisholm, who was Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education in the prior administration. And she laid out an argument about one, how to emphasize cultural competency as a part of being an effective teacher, and emphasizing the fact that that is a needed part of what is considered effective teaching versus ineffective teaching, and the fact that within the Every Student Succeeds Act, the key authorizing legislation for Department of Ed, there's a provision that says, low income and minority students must not be disproportionately taught by ineffective teachers, and that state education agencies have to ensure that that's not the case. And she goes through and suggests that a policy solution here might be, one, have the Department of Education actually define what ineffective looks like, and bearing in mind that cultural competency should be a part of that. Two, go through its Title I and Title II funding streams, as you noted, and have someone at the Department of Education who is tasked with identifying where and how those funding streams could leverage that new definition to help support more cultural competency in professional development and teacher training, et cetera. And three, think about, what are some of the other gaps that you want the larger external community to identify and surface to the Department of Ed that it just may not be aware of, and may just charge forward without a full sense of what the problem is. And so, I'm going to ride on her coattails and say that that is a specific and actionable proposal. I think that there, I saw in the chat also, there was an idea about having the NSF broaden its sense of who counts as a legitimate research entity. And some of that exists. There's, NSF has a broader impact sort of grant making process, which is supposed to take into account giving grants and sharing grant funding with broader community members for a research institution. There's an opportunity to build upon that and say, well, what does broader impacts 2.0 at NSF look like? And that could be a very specific, actionable thing for the new NSF director to carry forward, and could include, supporting research programs dedicated to diverse educators, and expanding even what is considered an educator, especially in considering sort of community-based education, those kinds of things, and have that be part of what NSF research dollars might go to, is supporting that diversified research landscape. So I'll throw those two out there.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely loving the ideas in the chat, whether it's incentivizing stronger connections between in school and out of school, whether that's between finding ways to ensure that STEM is more engaging. There's some really, really great, connectivity, addressing some of the barriers around technology and connectivity. There's some really awesome ideas that we're already starting to see bubble up in the chat. And I encourage people to utilize that, the policy placemat player table setting that Eric and Veronica shared, to think through. So what, we have an identified need, how do we make it even more actionable? And Eric, if you're able to pop in Monique's proposal into the chat, that would also be a helpful follow-up. Amazing. Vince, anything you would add in terms of hearing Eric's ideas?
Yeah, no, absolutely. As much as I'm an enormous fan of NSF, I would really like to see the federal government move away from competitive grant-based programs in support of STEM instruction, and looking at, if we're going to put federal dollars into STEM education, how do we do that in an ongoing, sustainable way? I've seen far too many programs that struggle to get those grants in the first place, and then once the grants run out, the programs go away because we don't have that fundable, that sustainable funding stream to encourage that, to ensure that work continues. So I think we don't address other core elements of instruction that way. And I think to the extent we can transition STEM, that will be a huge step forward.
Yeah, absolutely, which absolutely ties into how do you leverage some of the title dollars from the U.S. Department of Ed in order to support ongoing implementation or scaling of ideas, which kind of falls under, the policy lever of expanding existing programs. So you could, for example, call for an increase in Title I or an increase in Title IV to ensure that states and local entities have access to those kind of implementation and support dollars to be able to sustain great work, and particularly research-based or evidence-based work that's happening. So I'm seeing a ton of enthusiasm in the chat. I'm wondering if we should move into breakout rooms, Jeremy, and start to actually workshop some of these ideas and turn them into our specific and actionable set of proposals.
Melissa, you either read my mind or my face. So I appreciate you doing that. So yeah, not only are there a lot of good ideas in the chat, but what a lot of people are saying is, how am I going to get my ideas out there? How am I going to become part of this work? And this right now, this next, 23 minutes is the first step in making that happen. So we would like to collect some feedback from you. In just a moment, you're going to be placed in breakout groups at random. We'll be putting a link in the chat right now and a few times in case it gets lost. Please go ahead and open that link now before you move to your groups. That link is for a Google folder of a number of documents that are labeled group 1, group 2, and so forth. When you get to your breakout group, please note the number of your breakout group up at the top of your screen and open the group document in the folder that we're linking. You'll notice that one of the 3 questions on your document is highlighted in blue. Please work together to answer that question. Don't worry about the other 2 questions unless you end up with extra time. If you do, great, move on to those other questions. Your first order of business in this breakout is to find 3 volunteers. 1 to record your breakout session by pressing that record button. We'll tell you where to upload that recording later. 1 to take notes on that document, and 1 to keep track of your time. So when you get put in your breakout groups, note the group number so that you open the correct file. Have a recorder, a timekeeper, and a note taker. Open that Google link that we put in the chat right now so you've got it ready. And remember, and this is really critical, there's not a lot of time here, so we're not seeking consensus at this point, just collection of thoughts. We're seeking multiple voices and opinions at this stage. Each person should speak for no more than 1 minute at a time, and that's your group timekeeper's job. Again, answer that blue question first, and take notes under that question. Notes should be added under each question if you answer more than 1. Respect is of the utmost importance. This isn't a platform to convince others of what's important. We're all here to listen. We're really looking forward to reading what's on these documents and listening to your conversations. So with that, I think, Angie, you're going to go ahead and drop everybody into groups, and we will see you back here for just a couple of minutes at the end of the hour. Welcome back, everyone. People are still filtering in. Just a couple of minutes till we close up, share a couple things, get some final thoughts from Eric and Melissa, and get you out of here.
And Jeremy, just so you know, for next time, in case it gets lost, we could not record our session because we're not hosts.
Yeah, something happened. I'm gonna mention it.
Okay.
Thank you, though, Betsy.
Sorry. We also used our chat box to kind of have several people sort of add notes, and also given the time if people ran out of time to express their thoughts.
We're hoping that those chat boxes then save. So thank you for doing that. And I know that folks were trying to access the recording folder as well. So for folks who were able to record, I believe when this meeting ends, if you recorded your breakout group, it will download to your desktop. And so I'm going to put in the chat now the folder where you can drop those recordings in if you were able to. I'll do that a couple times. But if you were able to record, apologies again for the technical glitches, but we'd love to have you add those in.
Thank you, Veronica. So as Veronica mentioned, we know that some of you are not able to record. We apologize for that. We thank you, though, for the detailed recording that you did do in the notes documents, and we really appreciate that. I was glancing through those documents, and man, is there a lot in there, a lot to be thinking about. Removing or rethinking high-stakes testing. Teachers should look like our students, high-quality teachers in all classrooms, defining what an effective teacher is inclusively, incentivizing cross-sector partnerships and collaborative efforts, rethinking informal learning spaces for learning from cradle to gray, family engagement, renewing American competitiveness, and a whole lot more. There's a lot of content in there for everyone to be thinking about and going through. Before we close, Eric, any closing thoughts?
I'll just stick to the same line. Specific and actionable. And I'll also mention if someone has a specific day one idea, they can always also submit it on our site. Our team reviews those and works with lots of people on trying to make those proposals real.
Thank you, Eric. Melissa, final word?
Just keep the enthusiasm and great energy going. And, you know, if anyone wants to continue to workshop ideas, one of the benefits of being a former administration person is that I can certainly help, and I would love to do so. So thank you for just the great ideas and enthusiasm. I love the conversation.
Thank you for that offer. I'm sure people will take you up on it. We'll be keeping your group's Google Doc open and available for the next week, and would like you to keep adding additional thoughts to your assigned question or the other two as you think of them. Additionally, we're seeking your support to develop specific policy recommendations for the Day One team. If you're interested in collaborating with your colleagues to develop specific policy recommendations, please sign up in the link that'll be in the chat, and it'll also be part of the follow-up email that you receive from Veronica and Alyssa, and we'll reach out immediately to schedule follow-up meetings. On January 15th, you can expect the draft of this document to be released to all ecosystem leaders for review and comment. Thank you, Melissa, Eric, and Vince. And thanks to everyone who joined and participated today. This is the first step in a lot of work that has to happen in a very short period of time, and the input you've shared is incredibly valuable. Please continue to add thoughts to the document for the next week as you think of them. If you have any additional thoughts, you can email Alyssa or Veronica or email info@stemecosystems.org. Thank you all for the incredible work you do for your ecosystem, your region, and our country.